Here.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Here.
Mr. Vesey?
Here.
Ms. Vigil? Mr. Koulianos?
Here.
Mr. Zimbelis? Mr. Andriotis?
All right. We have a quorum. The item number 2 on our agenda is the approval of the minutes for April 18th of 2022. Can we have a motion?
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the minutes for April 18th.
Second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
I'm sorry, just 1 second. Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. All right. That brings us to item number 3, which has been deferred and will be re-advertised for a future date. That's all we need to say about that one, right?
Yep,
Okay.
it's just application 21-103 and 22-02.
And that brings us to item number 4 on our agenda, the quasi-judicial announcement and swearing of speakers.
Okay, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Planning and Zoning Board acts in a quasi-judicial capacity rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board wishing to disclose any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest this evening? Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak this evening, if you could please stand and raise your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. So sworn.
All right. That brings us to item number 5, application 22-21, a site plan approval of a multifamily apartment complex at 331 North Safford Avenue, T4C Transect District of the Special Area Plan. Do we have a staff presentation?
Yes, Allie Keene, Senior Planner. This property is located at the corner of East Park Street and North Safford Avenue, outlined in red here on the screen. The property is located within the city's special area plan. Specifically, it's within the T4C Transect zone, which is all of the areas shown here in this solid yellow. Most of the surrounding properties are also located within the T4C zone. There's some T5D located along North Pinellas Avenue. This area really is a mixture of different uses. To the north and west is primarily single-family residential. There's multifamily to the east of the site, and to the south there's some commercial uses. The applicants are here today seeking site plan approval of the Tarpon Springs Apartments project. This is a proposed 8-unit multifamily development within approximately 11,000 square feet of gross floor area. They're proposing 3 separate buildings. Each would be 2 stories in height. They are required to provide 12 on-site parking spaces for the 8 units, and they are proposing 17 spaces on-site. The landscape plan that was provided with the application does meet the standards of the SMART code for both the first layer requirements and the pond landscaping standards. This is a look at the proposed site plan. They're proposing to have the buildings fronting both Safford Avenue and East Park Street. Access to the site is from East Park Street with an internal parking lot. The buildings along Safford Avenue, there's 2 separate buildings, one here at this corner and one at this corner, separated by a patio or plaza area that will provide some pedestrian access from Safford to the development. Each of these smaller buildings will accommodate 2 different units, and again, 2 stories in height. The larger building along East Park Street will accommodate 4 units, again, 2 stories in height. All of the ground floor units will have direct access from the units to the public sidewalks on both Park Street and on Safford Avenue, and the upper story units will have balconies. This is a building elevation provided by the applicant. This is looking at the Safford Avenue elevation. And again, the two smaller buildings are separated by a proposed pedestrian plaza in between the buildings. This table just gives you a brief overview of the primary lot and building requirements of the SMART code. The proposed site plan does comply with all of those standards in terms of building placement and form on the site, as well as the use of the building. Again, the parking and landscaping requirements have been fulfilled with the provided site plan. The applicants are seeking a warrant request in regards to the street screen material, which they are looking to fulfill the required building frontage along East Park Street with both the building and as well as utilizing a street screen. They're proposing to use a 6-foot vinyl fence with landscaping along the pond, which is this blue line here, and then a landscaping street screen along this portion of the site. Typically, the SMART code requires a street screen to be an architectural wall, but it does allow applicants to request a variant or a warrant in order to use a different material choice. They did provide a elevation drawing of the Park Street frontage, showing again the landscaping street screen. This is the corner of Safford and Park. And then the landscaping street screen with also a fence, which is a little hard to see here, but in the background. The applicants are also seeking a waiver request in terms of site visibility. Typically, the code requires on every corner lot a clear site triangle that's 30 feet by 30 feet. That's shown here, measured along the property line in the red. As you can see, one of the buildings slightly encroaches into that site visibility triangle. Due to the unique situation of this property and some considerations of the intersection, the applicants are seeking a warrant, I keep saying variance, a waiver to encroach within the site visibility triangle. Some considerations is Safford Avenue, as we all know, is a median with the Pinellas Trail running along the center of the street. It prevents any sort of left turn movements to or from Park Street. You can only make right-hand turns from Park Street, and again, you can't make a left-hand turn from Safford. So this site visibility triangle is really trying to provide clear sight lines for northbound traffic when making movements from the intersection, and it doesn't necessarily apply in this situation. Another consideration is our code requires the site visibility triangle to be measured along the property line, which is this yellow line here. In this particular case, the edge of pavement is approximately 9 to 10 feet from the property line. So this triangle here is showing kind of a functional site triangle that's measured along the edge of pavement, and you can see the building does not encroach within that site triangle. The purpose of the site triangle is not just for vehicular traffic, but also to provide safe movements for pedestrians. There is a sidewalk along Safford Avenue here. However, you can see one from the functional site triangle that it doesn't impede the sidewalk visibility of pedestrians. Also, they provided on, it's a little hard to see, but on this site plan, there's another triangle here showing a 15 by 15 triangle that's also clear of obstructions. With that, staff does recommend approval of the site plan, including the warrant and the waiver request. We do have 4 conditions, which are listed here on the screen. The first is that construction plan shall be consistent with the approved site plan. The second are details for site lighting will be provided at the time of building permit. The third is the developer will comply with the public art program requirements if the project exceeds $1 million in cost. And the fourth is the site plan will expire within 1 year of the effective date of the site plan approval. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
With regard to the sight line, is that something that we face because of the SMART code that that the SMART code requires them? So that's pretty consistent, or is that just unique to this project?
It doesn't always come into play, but sometimes, yes, I think the SMART code is kind of competing with the site visibility triangles because it's asking you to push your buildings up closer to the street, but not every project is going to be at a corner. Not every project will, potentially have the impacts of the triangle, but sometimes, yes, it can be competing.
Okay. On the bottom bottom of the property, you talked about a vinyl fence along the northern part of that, or the top part of that property. I didn't see any requirement, or is there anything on the bottom of that requires any buffering from the adjacent property, or?
There is no requirement in the smart code for buffering between the two properties.
Okay, because I don't know if that's a road at the bottom, or is that?
This is, so it's hard to, I don't have an aerial photograph, unfortunately. But if I go to the zoning map.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, so
I
this
see.
property actually right here is a commercial property. This is, I believe, the Brighter Days Brewery, and there's kind of a warehouse building here used for commercial purposes. So the immediate site to the south is commercial at this time.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
One question on, I realize this is a site plan review, but they gave some elevations that are really quite attractive, I would say, of the structures they're planning to build. Does this commit them to actually building structures that are that attractive?
So it's part of their application, and it's part of the site plan approval, so I think they need to be consistent. One of the conditions that we have is that the site plan is consistent with what's being proposed here. So I think it needs to be relatively in lines with the
Relatively
rendering.
similar.
Yes. There can be some modifications, but not too much off.
We're trying to improve that one.
There you go.
Nice.
John.
No, I was going to say the same thing. That's a great looking building. I don't know.
Yeah, we're
Are you the architect?
Unfortunately, the engineer.
Yeah. All right. It's nice. It's nice. The on the visibility triangle, obviously, it's not relevant because it's one way, right? But and there's no, I mean, the Pinellas Trail's there. Maybe this is a Renee question. Is that there's no ever an expectation that that trail's going to be moved out for any reason, right?
I would not expect so, but
Okay.
No.
All right. So that site problem
Right.
should never impact anyone.
right. And the street doesn't necessarily, there's not another Park Street on the other side of Safford, so it's not like it would make any sort of connection to
Yeah,
cut across.
Yeah. Explain the street screen concept and what are you trying to accomplish with that?
So with the smart code, again, it's trying to address the street frontage, make it public and active between the private and public spaces. So typically, you do that by pushing your building closer to the street, and you're also trying to create kind of a unified wall along your street, depending on what transit zone you're in. The code recognizes that you can't always have a building that makes that entire frontage or meets a certain percentage. So each transit code has a minimum building frontage requirement. I believe this is 60%. So basically 60% of each frontage needs to have either your building at the maximum setback line, or you need to have some sort of street screen that continues that visual continuation. So in this case, they're fulfilling it with a portion along Park Street with their building, because it's at the maximum setback, but then also fulfilling it by doing a street screen along these two locations. And this portion of the building actually counts towards it as well. But this is also providing screening of the parking areas. So there's it's multifaceted.
Okay. That's all I have.
And I think we've asked this question before on other projects, but they are required to maintain that street screen then after the fact, so that if the fence blows down, they have to put it back up.
Correct.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, would the applicant like to make a presentation? Would any
Well, I have a
any-
question. I wanted to clarify that the gentlemen that are here, is that owner, developer? Right. And
Yes, I'm one of the owners.
State your name and address, please.
Leon Mavromatis, 1251 Paradise Lake Drive, Tarpon Springs.
thank you. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Could hear you.
And the engineer of record that produced those drawings that were being complimented, is he here?
This is the,
Mike Palmer, engineer of record.
Hi, Mike. My name's Justin. I had the luxury of reviewing the package that I don't have here today, and when I was looking through it, I was impressed and thought, golly, I could use an engineer like that. Those were very comprehensive, and we really appreciate those nice design drawings.
Thank
Good
you.
luck with your project.
Appreciate that.
thank you. Any more questions?
Any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, we'll call for public comments. I don't really think we have an affected party situation, so we'll go to general public comments.
Pierdolakis 514 Ashland Avenue. Sometimes we get distracted in our lives and we forget how important it is to come to these meetings. I want to say thank you to staff, but thank you for this applicant, because this is the type of project and design that Tarpon is looking for. You know it. We know it when we see it. It's not like the drop-down hotel that looks like a carbon copy out of Daytona Beach. It's working with the smart code, fitting it in. Now, I'm going to address a couple issues. The site visibility, I think, is smart. I think it's also good as far as you don't want to create walls in that particular area. So the streetscape is a good option. You're going to be putting greenery. You can maybe condition putting something along the south boundary. That's up to you as a recommendation. But I would like to say one thing I would like to offer to the gentleman here. He said they're working on improving their project. From seeing what I saw online and viewing, it looks like it's a bottom apartment and an upper apartment. So the bottom one has access to the street, and the top one has access to the view. What I would recommend, making them each unit two-story, where each unit has an entrance to the common street, and each unit has a view and a balcony. I don't know structurally if it can be done economically to redesign your project, but to me, along that area, a two-story building where you come in, you got your living room, your kitchen, a bathroom, you go upstairs, you got your 2 bedrooms or whatever. I don't know what their design is, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, but to me, that would really make this project top of the line. So that was my suggestion. Otherwise, I think this is the type of stuff that we need to see more in Tarpon, and I really appreciate when we have people come in and look at what Tarpon wants and works with us to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other members of the public wishing to comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comments. Does the staff have any rebuttal or closing comments?
No.
Does the applicant have any rebuttal or closing comments? Seeing none, we'll bring this item back to the board for consideration. I need a motion and a second.
I make a motion, we accept application 22-21
With the
with the conditions from the, recommended by staff.
I'll second that.
Can we have a roll call? Or do we have any discussion on the item? I just real quickly, again, as others have done, would like to commend the applicant. It's a very attractive submittal, and I think it will be a plus for the city of Tarpon Springs. Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. That brings us to item 6 on our agenda, application 22-68.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This pertains to the property at the northwest corner of US 19 North and East Klosterman. It's an ordinance 2022-19 for annexation, 2022-20 for future land use amendment, and 2022-21 for zoning map amendment. Can we have a staff presentation?
Yes, thank you. Pat McNeese, Principal Planner. You all have seen this corner before. This is at the northwest corner of Klosterman Road and US 19. This annexation, what you all have seen before is the annexation request for the large parcel, nearly an acre, which is now redeveloped as the Jalo Express Car Wash. You've probably seen that. This request affects a very small square of 25 square feet in area where the billboard pole is. It is a separate parcel. So the request is to annex in that parcel. The future land use and the zoning from Pinellas County to the city will be the same. The request is the same as it was for the car wash. This is the parcel right here, this little yellow. And of course you can see the aerial signature, on the aerial, that's the billboard. So again, under application 21-170, which you all heard in January, you approved the recommending the annexation of the car wash. The car wash property completely surrounds the billboard parcel. That was not on their submitted documents and surveys at the time. We did not catch it until after your hearing. So we had to stop that process. The car wash application has not been to the BOC yet. We had to stop, ask for the billboard parcel to come in. They both have to be annexed together in order to avoid creating an enclave. So if the car wash was annexed and the little square wasn't, that would be a county enclave, the little billboard square, and vice versa. So here's a survey. We did get an updated survey from them of the parcel, which is in yellow. And of course, they do have easements across the car wash parcel to maintain access and maintain the billboard. This is just a picture from Google Street View of where that billboard is. Right now, the property is not adjacent to city limits, the criteria, your criteria 1 will be met with both properties being annexed at the same time, and the ordinance effective date is written so that that will occur. They both have to be adopted and effective at the same time, or on the same date. As far as public facilities, of course, this parcel is not requesting any public facilities, but facilities are available to serve the parcel. Consistent with the future land use map, again, this property will be under the future land use designation of commercial general and under the city's highway business zoning as well. The billboard is a legal conforming use under the city's code, and it does constitute a principal use for the property. There's really no other practical development for the property. It's too small. This is also under retail and services on the countywide map, and there will be no change needed to the countywide map. As far as the zoning, again, highway business is consistent with the commercial general future land use map category. And as far as the uses, the property may be appropriate for very small piece. It's appropriate for a billboard pole, and that's what's there, pretty much. And it is located in an area where it can be served with public infrastructure. And the amendment will not adversely impact the city or exceed the city's fiscal capacity to serve. I would say that along with the car wash as far as, this fourth criteria speaks to, growth that makes sense, or amendment, annexations and growth, orderly and efficient development and growth in the city. The reason the car wash came in, if you all remember, is because it was contiguous because of the racetrack gas station across the street. So the city has that corner in its municipal limits. It makes sense from planning staff's perspective that the city also gain control of this corner as well. I would just say we have, I want to say, maybe 5 car washes within 2 miles. There's one up in Pasco, 3 here, 1 going in Palm Harbor. Looking ahead 20 years or whatever, I mean, you all have seen the Japanese restaurant bulldozed, the Mexican restaurants being demolished. Redevelopment happens on 19. In my opinion, anyway, as a planner, control of these 2 corners of Klosterman is a good thing for the city. So I believe it does promote the efficient, orderly annexation in the city. So we are recommending approval of all 3 ordinances: annexation, future land use, and the zoning. And again, the approval of the above will be contingent on and consecutive with, concurrent with the car wash parcel. And there were no responses to public notices. Yes, Mr. Kuskidis.
Are they common ownership, the monopole and the car wash?
They are not in common ownership. There is a young lady here tonight with Beacon Civil. They are the agent, and they do represent both owners, but they are not in common ownership.
Okay. I was going to say something funny. I was going to say, do we have the capacity to annex this property with our utilities? But
yeah, they aren't asking for any.
I'm
no,
kidding.
no trip generation unless you count the
water.
guy with the truck that goes to paint the billboard. Yes.
So this is just a cleanup, right? This is something that,
It is.
okay. So let me ask you, and this is just a curiosity question. The pole right now sits on county property, right? In the county, not county property, in the county.
Yes,
And,
in the county's jurisdiction.
Yeah, so is the sign ordinances the same on 19 for city
No.
property, or would that?
Do the county
Would
and
there be
city
a
sign
would there be a
ordinances?
non-conforming issue here?
No,
Fine.
the city's sign ordinance allows billboards as a principal use on federally funded highways. That would be 19 and Alt 19.
There's no
Elsewhere
there's
in
no
the city,
sign issue here.
No, yeah, elsewhere in the city, they're prohibited.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
I do have a question. It's really kind of it's not related to this. We're annexing because we don't want to create an enclave, number one. So, but the racetrack we've actually annexed the racetrack gas station into the city.
Correct.
Okay. Assuming, and I'm thinking down the line here, and maybe it's not the right forum for this, but let's say this, St. Pete College needed to add a building or improve, and they need to access utilities. Would they be required or necessary to annex into the city?
Yes, St. Pete College is already
Oh, they're
annexed
already in the
into the
city?
city.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, what about Innisbrook?
They're not
I'm
in
going
the city.
off on a tangent, but I'm looking at it from
So-
the tax
Trying to
base.
get them in the city, is that what?
I'm trying to improve the tax base.
So, one thing that comes into play for properties that are south of Klosterman, so anything that's in the Palm Harbor Fire District has a separate legislation tied to it, special act tied to it. So, in order for us to annex anything within the Palm Harbor Fire District, it actually has to be approved by the Pinellas County Board of County Commissioners.
All right, never mind.
So, sorry.
I was just trying to improve the tax base. I don't know. Thank you.
Any other board questions for staff? Would the applicant like to make a presentation?
I think that was a no.
Would the board like to ask the applicant any questions? Okay, seeing none, do we have anyone here to make public comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Does anybody want to make rebuttal or closing comments?
No, thanks.
All right, we'll bring it back to the board. I need a motion and a second.
And we need to take these individually.
All three, yeah.
Chair, I'd like to motion approval for ordinance 2022-19.
Wait a second.
Wait, is that the right?
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Chair, I'd like to motion approval of ordinance 2022-20, future land use amendment.
Second.
Can we have a roll call?
Koulianos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
And Chair, I'd like to motion approval of ordinance 2022-21, zoning map amendment.
Second.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes. All right, that brings us to discussion item number 7 of the interim revisions to the Comprehensive Plan and Land Development Code.
Thank you.
Can we have the staff presentation, please?
Good evening. Renee Vincent, Planning and Zoning Director. So not so much of a presentation on this as some interactive discussion. So over the last few months, between discussions with you at a previous work session as well as with the Board of Commissioners and then just internally in the Planning Department, we've identified some areas that we don't really want to wait to go forward with some code amendments and comp plan amendments if there's agreement to do that. We don't want to wait until we get through the full-blown comp plan amendment. We think some of these things are important to go ahead and tackle now. So I wanted this to really be the process that I wanted to use to do this is to, one, just kind of have an open-ended discussion with you as the Planning and Zoning Board. I haven't drafted anything in a strike-through underline regarding any of this. I want to collect your information, your thoughts, do the same with the Board of Commissioners on anything that I don't already have direction on. Then we'll step back, we'll do, strike-through underlines, and then we'll come back and do this again. So that's, so for this evening, I've identified kind of 6 areas to discuss, and I'll kind of, I'll take my cues from the board as to how you want to go about this. I'll briefly talk about just a high level what they are. One is this conditional use provision for residential uses in those 2 future land use map categories that are commercial. I think everyone knows the origin of why that has become a topic of conversation. The second is just, looking at the coastal high hazard area policies of the comprehensive plan. Is there anything that we really want to jump in and try to go ahead and amend now? Or do we want to wait for the larger, comprehensive plan update to occur? Within the Land Development Code itself, we've already had some discussions around the mandatory annexations. But I just want to bring that full circle to this board to kind of get some formal comment on the annexation process and the direction that we perhaps should go with that, especially as it relates to mandatory annexation for utility services. We also are looking at the process for when we have a project that has multiple applications associated. There's nothing really in our code that gives us direction on the order of business. Should you process a land use map first? Should you process things concurrently? Should you break them apart? So some discussion around that process. I do have some direction from the Board of Commissioners on the mobile food truck ordinance. Again, I wanted to have that discussion with this board for input before we, step back and draft that. That's really talking about allowing food trucks as like a temporary use to, or through a temporary process, like if someone's having a birthday party at their house and they want to have a food truck for one evening, that type of thing. And then lastly, the last topic of conversation is the requiring developers. Right now, a project comes through and requires review for certain engineering things. Mainly stormwater is the big one, but sometimes transportation as well. And we have an engineer of record that provides those services. And right now, the city's just absorbing those engineer of record fees for that review. And so we are looking at establishing some sort of a cost associated with that. The city can get reimbursed for some of those costs that actually comes from the developer. So with that, that's the big high level. And then, I'll leave it to you guys as to how you want to tackle this tonight. If we just want to start at condition 1, or yes, Mike. Sorry.
That's fine. I want to start, and maybe I'm looking at it from a 30,000-foot level here. My biggest concern with regard to this community is build out, and I know I've always asked about utility capacity, but even though we may have the capacity utilities, we are at a point of build out, and I know there's some discussion about repurposing property, et cetera. Maybe I don't know where I'm going with this, but some of the issues we face with regard to, I'll take the hotel as an example. I tend to think there are pockets within this community that should all be conditional use to avoid. I think because of the issue with build out and giving somebody a development by right, I think that may not be in the city's best interest without whether it's the commission or this board having some input as to the developer's ability, number one. And I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say, but I just, there are certain areas of town that should be all conditional use. And with regard to development, just from my perspective. And one of the things that we also don't get an opportunity, I don't know how much vacant land we actually have for large development anymore in the city of Tarpon Springs, but one of the things that I think we're short on is requiring them to contribute for recreational space. I know we may assess that in an impact fee, but that actually is not providing. It provide money, but it's not providing space. And you could build a swing set, but you got to have a place to put it. And I think we are missing the boat with regard to like the development that was on the other side of Anclote. I think that Pioneer that did, that went through the county first. And so it did not give us the opportunity to require a park space or recreational space. I think we're doing a disservice to the people in this community by not having enough. I could talk about food trucks too, but I think we could bring that up later if you want. But
well, and I'll leave it to this board as to how you want to go through this. If you don't want to discuss all of these, if you don't have input, or if you do, but I wanted to bring these forward as a chance to discuss. So if you want to if we start with the conditional use provisions for residential and secondary and residential as secondary uses within the commercial general and commercial limited future land use map categories. Those are the only two categories where residential is called out as a conditional use. I mean, thoughts? I mean, it's.
I think there's definitely some instances that I can see on the north side of the river where there's property that's industrial probably that is going to have a tendency to want to go residential probably. And I'm honestly not sure whether that's good or bad, but it's something that's that's gonna continue to come up until all the property that's in the city north of the river is eaten up, I think. What do you think about that?
I think there's a bit of apples and oranges with what I'm talking about here. But, I mean, to your point, we recognize that the north side of the river is an area that probably needs some specific planning effort to it as to what's going to happen up there. I mean, right now, the lion's share of the property is in industrial land use, and frankly, getting it out of industrial is next to impossible under the countywide plan. Plus, the lion's share of a lot of it is also in the coastal high hazard areas, so introducing residential to it at this point in the game is problematic as well, since the density's not there to begin with. This issue with the conditional uses for residential in the commercial general and the commercial limited land use categories is a bit of an oddity. And it, clearly it reared its head with the Anclote Harbor project. And so whether or not, and my problems with is really in administering it is the way the definitions and things are worded. And I provided that context. I don't know if you've had a chance to really read through this, but it's not hard and fast as to, what is a secondary use. It's suggestive. It's not. It is. And so that's some of the issues that I have had from an administration standpoint on that particular, on that particular issue. And the secondary use provision is used throughout all of the future land use map categories. So it's a bigger problem with, what do you really do with the secondary uses? And it's a holdover from the old countywide plan rules. That will get addressed as we do the overall comp plan update. I want to address that issue. But I had had some direction from the Board of Commissioners regarding the whole conditional use piece for residential to at least evaluate that in those commercial districts. And those are primarily on US 19. I mean, we have some on Alt 19 as well, but that's where that really comes into play. Yes, sir.
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
would you say the heartburn that's come up about the change to residential it came from that particular instance, certainly, but it's not so much necessarily the concept of residential use in that area as it is the sort of intensity of the residential use that's occurring in that area.
Yeah, and I think, it certainly, I think that's part of it, and so, perhaps, that might be a good box to put around it, is that, projects of a certain size can take advantage of that conditional use property in there, or that's part of that's something that's not part of the discussion, and I think that's something that could be helpful to, in the future.
And it's kind of like if the property is going to be used for anything, and I realize there's people who don't think or don't want it to be used for anything, and if somebody wants to buy it and do that, that's good. But I mean, if you're going to allow anything to happen there, it seems to me the lowest density and the lowest damage would be some form of very low density residential.
If I may, Ms. Vincent, first I'd just like to say thank you for taking the time to put this together at tonight's meeting. Second, I'm going to admit sheepishly that I read the first two application packages and I did not see this previously, and frankly, this is pretty heavy.
There's a lot here.
It's pretty heavy. So I'm doing my best to read frantically and pull something out.
I think most of these you're familiar with already, so.
Right. So I'd like to start, as someone said, I want to go up and come back.
Sure.
So actually, I want to go to, I'll keep this quick. I want to go to number 6.
Okay.
This was brought up several years ago and shot down point blankly, and I think there's strong support, at least from me, and I think if the other board members understood this, is that being able to recoup costs that are being burdened, that the city's being burdened with, or specifically your staff and office, that should be put back on the developer, I would be in favor of that.
Okay.
And I think this is a limited application. I think there's other costs for specialists that you guys are burdening also, but you're only going for one here. I'd probably in favor
I
of
think it
more.
might be a little broader than that at the end of the day, so
Okay.
I would like to be a little more holistic, that if we need a transportation engineer to do a peer review of something, we have the ability to do that.
Okay. I sat at the far end when this was brought up several years ago, and I didn't think it was given a fair hearing. So number 6, I would be in support of that.
Okay.
But I want to, that was easy.
That is an easy.
That was an easy one, but I want to swing back to number 1, because I'm going to read your first bullet point under number 1. The overall intent of secondary use is specifically in residential commercial designations. See the highlight, which is on the next page. And then you pose a question here, and I think this might get to the heart of why we're talking about it. Does a secondary use have, in quotation, less, end quotation, rights than a primary use when the definition uses such words as typically rather than mandatory language such as shall? So you posed a question and I'm going to give an answer. I think the answer is yes, a secondary has less rights than a primary when the definition says that. So this P&Z board member wants to clarify and say, yeah, there's less rights there. That's the best I can do at this moment on that
Okay,
topic.
I'll take everything I can get at this point.
Where are you reading from? Out of,
Oh, forgive me, this would be
page
page number...
3.
Page 3.
Page number 3, number 1, first bullet point.
okay, I see, all right.
As I don't, not to put words in staff's mouth, but just trying to get into the depth of conditional use and then this very specific verbiage of how it's written and attempt to clarify, because we've been burdening them with clarification.
And can I back up a little bit? If
Please
that's okay?
do.
And just to clarify what I was talking about, and I want to use the hotel as the example. We sort of had conditional use surrounding a permitted use. They were permitted on one across the street.
Correct.
Okay, and so if you want to call it an enclave, it's an enclave of conditional use in the middle of a permitted use.
It had split zones on it, yes.
And that's what I think becomes problematic, is, it's one thing to have a small area within a conditional use area that's conditional and a permitted use within that. So it's either should be all permitted or all conditional, if that makes any sense. Because it was just a small piece of property that was permitted use, the overall conditional use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand where you're going. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Just to kind of spur a little bit more, the other, the conditional use provision for compatibility review, let's see. I had put in primary use, secondary use, typically, okay. No, okay, I think we're, the other approach that I might consider is with the residential as a secondary use in those commercial land use categories, is maybe putting, in addition to like project size, the other way that maybe we could get around it or put our arms around it would be only a certain percentage of the property could be dedicated toward a residential use versus just kind of this open-endedness the way it is now. So that would be another way that we might, so if you've got 15 acres and you wanted to have residential as a secondary use, well, okay, only a small portion of the property can actually be used for that. The rest can then be set aside for something else that's not residential. So putting an acreage limitation or a percentage of area limitation around it is another thought process that I had when trying to put some clarification on this.
But do we have a lot of open space left? I mean,
believe it or not, we actually do have a fair amount of space. But mostly it's big parcels like the one on the river. No, there's not. We don't have huge ones available. That's by far the largest, with the exception of, Stauffer's not in the city, but that's it's in our planning area. most other things are gonna be smaller infill. I mean, you've actually got some parcels around the sponge docks that, they may, I would say some of them are underutilized as parking, that are huge parcels of land. Whether or not, those may develop in the future, I don't know. But, we have, the one thing I will say, here's what I can tell you definitively from what our consultants have been doing with the comp plan update so far and doing the analysis on vacant and developable land. We have ample land available to meet our population projections out to 2040 with how the land is zoned right now. So we definitely don't need to increase density to meet our needs for the next 20 or 30 years. We're in good shape with what we have. I don't know if that helps you or not right now.
Well, 2040 ain't that far away, believe
Well,
it or not.
If I may, just, I'm sorry, John,
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Back to the point you were making specifically in regards to conditional use provisions and your concept of restricting conditional use, specifically residential and commercial, to a percentage of that property. This board member thinks that is a rather elegant solution to putting restrictions on secondary use. That's why we call it secondary use and not primary use. And if I can go just a little bit further, I want to, and forgive me, but since you brought it up, so that same bullet point, I'm going to read it again. The conditional use provisions for compatibility review for residential uses and commercial land use designations, and then you give two sub-bullets, and you're kind of proposing this circle, this logic circle that we all might be struggling with. By definition, this review is referred back to the LDC process, becomes quasi-judicial, and then if the standards are met, then the use must be approved. What I'm reading here is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, is that it doesn't allow any evaluation of the project, because if it just meets these basic standards, it must
other
be
than
approved.
the conditional use review criteria, so those are fairly broad, so you do have a lot of latitude there. But to your point, if you've clearly shown that you meet those conditional use criteria and you've checked, then it's in a quasi-judicial process, you are, I'll say, obligated to vote or recommend approval. So yeah, and my problem with the way that whole section takes place in this instance is you've got something in the land use, in the comprehensive plan that is in referring back, which, and a lot of the comprehensive plan, if you're doing a land use map amendment, things like that, those are legislative types of decisions. And then you're getting referred back to a process, if it does require conditional use, that's a quasi-judicial process. So it starts to muddy up the waters, if you will, when you're trying to review things. So, and this gets to this second discussion item about the order of operations of how we process applications, or do we have multiple applications? So I went off on a tangent there. I'm not sure I had a point.
You didn't.
So.
Absolutely, you didn't. No. Keep going.
So I think that having the comp plan referring back to a conditional use process it wouldn't be my first choice. Let's put it that way.
What would be your first choice?
I would rather have these things be a little cleaner in that, that should be handled by your zoning and your land development code. If something is, requires a conditional use, at least have it be part of the zoning, not necessarily something that's stuck in a land use category. Because there's two of them in the entire comp plan, and these are it. And so it's an oddity to me, frankly. I would rather beef up the secondary use provisions.
Which we just discussed. One option
yes,
is
exactly.
putting a percentage restriction on that.
Exactly.
Okay. And do you have another suggestion for that?
I would just get rid of the conditional use construct out of the comp plan altogether. That would be my suggestion. And then we clean up the secondary use and put some boxes around that.
I'm sorry, I want to hear that again for reference. You perhaps think that eliminating the conditional use reference altogether
out
would
of the
help
comp
clean
plan.
up
Out of the comp plan. It really should be a land development code issue, not a comprehensive plan driven thing, is my opinion.
I'd be in support of that suggestion. and then I'll quit hogging the microphone.
No,
I'm
no,
so
no,
sorry,
no.
but for once, I was having a mind melt. with Miss- And I didn't want to break out of it. Okay, forgive me, go ahead.
Mr. Spock, and your mind melt. So, you know, I think the biggest, one of the biggest issues in town is height. I mean,
Yes.
that was the whole, one of the large debates on the hotel issue.
Sure.
It was an issue with Anclote Harbor, because they went up pretty high. It's been a fight in town for going all the way back
Ever.
to when my brother was mayor 32 years ago. So, and I'm the baby in the family, so if you had any questions as to why I look so young. So, no, and what can we, you know, when we go through this whole process, this comp plan redesign, land development code, smart codes, all the different things we're gonna do, at some point, are we gonna have like a master overlay that's gonna go over the town and say, okay, 2 stories over here, 3 stories allowed over here, and such, and so that at some point, you know, we're so vulnerable. We're so vulnerable, and Anclote Harbor showed that, right? You had one board member who had to recuse himself, then you had 4 board members voting, and it passed 3-1, and all, I mean, if 1 went over here, now it's 2-2, it doesn't pass. So these huge developments, and you know, and that's out on 19, and it's probably less other, you know, and I had my issues, you know, my issues from the first P&Z meeting, and the second P&Z meeting has always been the traffic issue. But beyond that, you know, that's out there. But when there's gonna be one here, like, you know, somebody wants to go 6, 7, 8 stories, whatever, and it gets down to that's too much. I believe it's too much power in a couple people's hands, and I think that the citizens are concerned about it, big time, that we have some controls, you know, and, you know, whether that means we have this master overlay, and if we want to go above that, it's got to go to referendum or something that takes it to where the people get the town they want, and not one where, you know, hundreds of people are against something, and yet it still passes because one guy, right? One guy. You see, I'm trying to use the right fingers. But, you know, it's just, so in all this exercise we're doing, is there going to be something in here that's going to be protective for the city to make it a little tougher for a developer to come into town and fundamentally change the look of this city?
I think, so right now, within the special area plan and the Transect code, which that's the docks, that's the downtown, the Alt 19 corridor from Mears up to the bridge, Tarpon Avenue. So within that area, generally speaking, the heights, I mean, there are, you know, when we went through that special area plan and we went with a focus group over that 2-year period, height was an issue that was debated, you know, a lot. And so we landed at the heights that we did. Along with that was the acknowledgement that there are certain types of uses, like a hotel, that can't function within those heights. That was the thought process at that time, which is why you have that outlier with hotels, the way that smart code and the special area plan is written. Whether or not that is, you know, and I think that all needs to be evaluated again, probably. You know, we're 11 years in, 12 years into the smart code. So I think that's a fair, you know, a fair discussion point of, are those still appropriate? Now, outside of that, generally speaking, you know, everything within that area, or 2 stories and 3 stories, is the regular height limits in those, throughout the smart code, absent taking the hotel out of the picture.
Right.
So I don't know that there's an overall problem. You have a very specific one. So whether or not it's appropriate for a hotel, I mean, I'm not gonna.
Even beyond the
Yeah.
hotel,
Yeah,
I think
so-
we have to put some teeth in this stuff that protects the town
Sure,
from turning into something that the majority of the people
sure.
don't want.
I mean, and I think that's I think that's one of those community conversation things that needs to happen at some point, maybe just specific to literally that issue alone. I think some of this will come out of the, the comp plan update as well, just as the overall, what do we want to be over the next, 20 years? I hear you. I understand your concern.
No, I just, again, my biggest concern is developing a comprehensive plan. I know we have to grow as a community. It's just, my biggest concern is how we grow.
Sure.
And so I'm a little bit hesitant about a lot of things because of build out. And I keep stressing that. About 20 years ago, I went, when I was on the board of the chamber, I was the person selected to go to a countywide discussion. And back then, they were saying that Pinellas County was reaching build out. That was 20-something years ago. And they really not done anything to change that as far as planning ahead. You could drive down 19 and see all the apartment complexes. So that's my fear for this community, is that we, I want to come back to, if I live that long, 20 years from now, and still recognize this community.
Where are you going?
No,
get
but
lost in
if I
20
live
years?
long
Like
enough,
Golly goes for
20 years
20
from now, I want to be able to recognize this community as a community that people come here for. And I think John hit the nail on the head. So I think we're charged with it, and you're charged with developing, the rules that protect us. Because if it's something that's permitted, our hands are tied. Okay.
So, and the only thing that I want to caution is as we have these discussions, because I hear what you're saying. The only thing that and I may need the attorney to help me out with this, but if we go radically in another direction that literally starts to affect the development rights and of a property owner, I just think we need to be because we have things that have been in place for 30 years.
I understand it, and that's why I think
it's a fine line there.
it's a fine line. But when somebody has a complete right to do something, that takes the ability of the process out of the picture. When you don't affect somebody's rights if they know going in that it may be conditioned on certain rules.
But my point is changing our ordinances at this point to pull back things there's just a line there that we have to be cognizant
I understand
of.
it, but we're at the point where we're looking at the city and basically doing a whole land use, evolving a land use plan for this community. Am I right?
We're updating the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
But that doesn't give us the wholesale ability to just say, you've been commercial general for the last 30 years, and now we're going to say you need to be, something less than that. I guess that's my question. We just need to be sensitive about how we do that.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
No, I don't
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, and if I could interject.
Yeah.
I think, your concerns are we've reached build out or we're very near to build out. And so now we're talking about redevelopment, and there's a lot in the code that gives private property owners development rights by right without review. I get to do this because I get to do this because you told me I get to do this. And I think that the overall conversation, especially the topic that we're on the agenda, is at least the first two have to do with the comprehensive plan, which I think is a good place to start. From a legal perspective, you're talking about the comprehensive plan being the Bible for the city, what it has to follow, the Constitution, as it were, the growth plan for the next 20 years. So if you give people a comprehensive plan that says you might have had that right, by right, because it's in the code, but this is where we think our community is going to in the future. Implementing that by land use regulations is easier because you're able to kind of temper some of those expectations is easier, but it's going to be a process. It's clearly not going to be an overnight thing, as
I
you
know,
know.
and I'm not saying it's overnight,
Yeah.
but I think you
But I
explained it.
think that's where you
Yeah,
get.
I think you explained it, right on point. I guess what I'm trying to say, you're just more eloquent at it.
Yeah, well, thank you. No one's ever accused me of being eloquent before. No, just kidding. Yeah, I think this is a good discussion to have. I think this is the way to do it, and I think you're 100%. Your opinion is valid that you're at a point of saturation. So maybe the way that the community pushes forward those regulations is first with the comprehensive plan, and then implementing development regulations without triggering some of those statutory private property rights big bang litigations that people are so fond of. So as long as you do it right, I think.
Because, there's impacts in our rec facilities, or impacts in our roads. I always go back to Sponge Docks because that's where I grew up, is, we talk about the development down there, but the infrastructure down there may or may not be able to support that. So not that we want to take somebody's development right away or property right away, but I think we have to be more conscientious as to how it impacts the balance of this community, and so.
Well, I think we had.
I beat that horse to death already.
No, but I think we've had a lot of confusion amongst the citizens over the words property rights. And that came up a lot, obviously, in Include Harbor. It was constantly, property rights. I have a commercial piece of property down the street. And I think I have a right to build on that property based on what it is, right? The way it's zoned, the restrictions, the setbacks, and all the other issues. That's my right. Now, I have a right to come and ask you, can I change it and go all the way to the end of a property? Can I do a blind curve deal like, triangle issue like that? I have that right, but I don't have the right beyond that. You have a right to say no, and the city has a right to say no, but I have a right to what I bought. And so I'm not telling people they shouldn't have a right to what they bought. I think at some point we need to, if we don't already have it, you may say we already have it, a general overlay. What is everything we have? What are all those areas, especially when we come to height? What are the restrictions on height? And become very, very diligent and make it difficult to change, for somebody to go above and beyond that. Not just, any 5 jabronis that get elected to the city commission, and and I might be one of those jabronis, but but that's, you want a government, you always want a government that can sustain bad leadership, right? That's like the United States. We have our whole system allows for, and I'm not naming anybody's names, but it gets through that because the process is bigger than any one person, and it's bigger than than that. And we just need, again, like Mike says, we're down to where we can see the end zone, right, of build out. And we just need to be careful going forward, and we don't want to make it that easy for somebody to come in and say, I'm going to put a 9-story, 10-story apartment building on the corner of, Pinellas and Tarpon Avenue, and if somebody will pass it, well, boom, there it is, and now we fundamentally changed the town, and it's terrible. Even though I hope you would fight diligently to prevent something like that happening. But that, I know that's an exaggeration, but that's what
I understand.
But I'm saying that's where we got to get. That's where we got to get.
The beauty of a representative democracy.
Excuse me?
It's the beauty of a representative democracy.
Yeah, but we got it. But you got pushbacks.
Right, and to your point, I think it fits right in what Mr. Kuskudis said. You want to temper the development, and in your particular case, you're looking to temper the heights to make sure that the city stays in a community that is not tall skyscrapers or large hotels or condominium complexes.
If people want that, then they can get it. but-
Right, and I think that's exactly how it's done. You know, the city of Tarpon Springs has done a lot of outreach that most jurisdictions, in my profession, we don't see, in getting its community involved in the comprehensive planning process. And that really, from a legal perspective, is going to guide exactly what the city is allowed to do from a regulatory perspective. So if you get the comp plan right, then the land development regulations should come easier, and the processes and the people and the reviews and those types of things will come and they'll follow. So, you know, I think they all go kind of hand in hand with what Renee is getting here and the direction that she's looking for this board to kind of give her.
Thank you. I think we got to give we have to commend the current leadership of our city that's pushing all this for us to have all these plans and to bring it back to the people, because this is refreshing. It really is refreshing.
And I don't mean to take hold of the meeting, but at some point, did you guys want to give Renee direction on these 6 items? Because you still have another discussion.
Kind of talking through them, yeah.
Yeah,
so.
because you still have another discussion item on your all's workshop items too, so.
I want to talk about item number 4 on here, because it relates back to everything else, sort of in a way, and it is something that could be changed relatively easily, I think, and could have an immediate impact in avoiding some problems that we've had over the past few months. Yeah, I think it's really important that we split some of these things up, and staff will have to help us do it in a logical way that still maintains a flow of the project before us. But you know, coming from a background of being on the other side of the podium as an applicant on a number of large projects years ago, every place that I did business before, there was several steps. You never brought a rezoning and a site plan and other things all at one meeting. That just wasn't done. The developer wasn't going to spend the money to take the chance that you'd get shot down on the rezoning, and all of that other stuff would be for nothing. So I was kind of surprised when I saw the way things come here, but somehow or other, I think those things definitely need to be separated out. And, you know, if something comes before us and we can see we don't want them to get the conditional use to change to residential or whatever, we can stop the project right there before there's a lot of time and effort wasted on all sides.
Yeah, I think land use is an obvious one. You know, now, I mean, if we're talking about a project that's, you know, a small infill project, I don't necessarily have a problem running land use and zoning at the same time. Site plan typically, I've never seen us run, to my knowledge, I've never seen a land use, a rezoning, either one of those, and a site plan, not a plan development, but a site plan run at the same time. Usually they go the land use and zoning route first, and then you do site plan later. That one's not terribly problematic. Conditional use can sometimes be, you know, problematic in lumping those together if it requires. I think at the same time, I also want a little bit of flexibility for, you know, for small projects that are infill. That's, you know.
Let's say like a signpost of 25 square feet. Would that be a good example?
That would definitely meet the litmus test.
Well, yeah, I think
Now, the one thing I did say in all of this was that annexation's kind of that's the outlier, because you typically have to run your annexation, land use, and zoning. You want to run those concurrently because you don't want to bring a property in and then have it still be subject to Pinellas County and their land use and their zoning. So those annexations I would kind of like to take out of the discussion for right now. I think that because there's a process there that really, I think, does need to be followed. So I did kind of call those out a little bit.
I think there's got to be a threshold of some sort,
You know,
and
I mean,
below some threshold.
Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
make it pretty low, like, you know, an acre.
Yeah.
You know, you know, and maybe there's some, you know, maybe there's some process to ask for a waiver to that. I don't know, but I would like to keep that acreage threshold pretty low to where you would need to amend the land use map first. And if that is okay on its surface and can get through at least get through a first reading, okay, then you can go ahead with your rezoning and other things that would follow it. But to me, the land use is the big one.
I'd like to chime in that I support Chairperson's comments about number 4 would solve a lot of at least in-house challenges that we have.
It could make things smoother for us and also just avoid some things that have happened in the past that are problems. And it actually is helpful to, while the developers won't like it because it slows it down another month or two, it is helpful to them because they don't have to spend all that money until they know that they're at least past the first step.
I would also like to show support for staff's recommendation of that initial land use change. I think that's what you were referring to, is that maybe peeling that off as an initial step, and that there might be a acreage threshold to reach, meaning that it needs to be greater than 1 acre to trigger that peel off? Is that how
That's what I
understood
would
that?
be looking at, something that,
Okay.
you know, and I think, I mean, frankly, I think, you know, I probably, would still have the latitude, depending on how we write this, that if it's, let's say it is a smaller project, but it's in a real sensitive area, that it does require a land use map change, that, you know, I wouldn't hesitate to.
Perhaps maybe it's also triggered
Yeah,
by the application of a
yeah,
conditional
exactly.
use
So
where
I'll-
there's scrutiny.
Yeah.
And if I may, I actually wrote in under number 4, annexations. I know, surprise. So help me understand your thought process, because when you said it, I understood it or I supported it, is that we, and I can't speak for everyone, but I just want to speak for me, it actually is that combination of annexation with everything else that creates this knee-jerk reaction or a little bit of a closure, because what we feel on this end, again speaking for myself, is that there's a presupposition that annexation is going to be approved. And that means that, so we've got this huge application, it's annexation, it's future land use, it's this, it's that, and we're like, hold on. What if we don't want to do the annexation? And I know that it's a quasi-judicial, but it seems like I would prefer that that was the first, the only, and foremost, even though it was administratively messy, but it gets down to the heart of my personal opinion, and back to annexations, that we're just blank checking these annexations. And that's just my opinion. And so I don't know how you could structure that in. I'm not going to say it can't be your way, but I personally don't care for annexations being lumped in to other applications, because I think they should stand on their own and be evaluated for their completeness, their intent, and even though it's not yet written into our comprehensive plan, the value and the correctness of annexing certain properties. I can say that because it's not being applied for right now. If that makes any sense. So hit me
And
back
I mean,
with that.
it can be
We're
done.
talking
I mean,
about
our code
cross-
actually,
number 4.
it does
new
say that
processes.
the area annex shall be subject to the
Oh,
regulations
that's
of the
on the
Pinellas
first
County Land Use Plan and Zoning Code until the area is zoned and designated with a land use district by the city to comply with its comprehensive plan. So it can be done.
Doesn't mean it should be done.
Yeah, and it's, so there's also, and we can shift gears over to the whole annexation discussion if you want, but.
Not yet, because I want to make sure
Okay.
Merle's concerns
Right.
about number 4 have been met.
Yeah,
and that we've-
I'm good on that, and I was thinking about talking about number 3 actually
Okay.
also.
Right, so go ahead.
So let's take a little bit of a step back on the whole annexation discussion. So you have a couple of things at play here. Back in, I want to say around 2006, the city put in, and I put it in your backup, section 20-23, that because these are the ones that seem to trip us up. These mandatory annexations for city utilities. So these are the ones that become kind of problematic, and these are the ones that we've had a lot of concern about. You know, the car wash is a good example. So, you know, and the fact that a lot of times these are started in Pinellas County, the projects, they get through a certain review process, and then, oh wait, you have to have City of Tarpon Springs utilities in some manner, which kicks in this section 20-23, connections to public water, reclaimed and sewer, so it says annexation is required. So this was put in place in 2006. Now, we typically do want properties, in my opinion, if we're serving them, you know, we want to annex them. We want that tax base, and it's better for them ultimately because their water and sewer rates are going to be less if they annex than if they stay in unincorporated area. I think the real hitch is when you get things that seem to be different than what they might be if they're developed under our regulations.
Non-conforming?
Could be non-conforming. So if we're going to keep section 20-23, which I think we should, but I think it does need to be amended somewhat to say, if you start your process in Pinellas County and you need our utilities, then you're going to finish your process in Pinellas County, and then we will annex the end product in, versus you must annex in, you must come in as vacant land. Because I don't think we can, I don't know that we can mandate. That's okay, so that's my thoughts.
Okay, I disagree in this respect. By waiting till their project is done, okay, and as was said, if the county lets them do something that's non-conforming, and then all of a sudden it's built, and now we have to annex them, as opposed to, and I don't know how it would require that part of the annexation process or part of the permitting process when they go to Pinellas County is if they're going to annex, and this maybe have to have a discussion with Pinellas County, if they're going to be annexing for utilities in Tarpon Springs, their development plans or their plans in general have to be consistent.
So, okay, go ahead.
With the city of Tarpon Springs, for example, whether it's sidewalks, whether it's parks and recreation, things of that nature, and that's
those incidental things are those types of things are. We require that when they, and so if we have an impact fee that the county doesn't assess, but when they annex in, we will assess that. So we have like general governmental impact fees and things of that nature. If sidewalks are, so sidewalks might be a good example. Where we have real difficulties is setbacks. We don't know what zoning it's going to be until it comes in, and so I can't determine what it's going to be compliant with. That's
okay. I'm building a house. I go to Pinellas County. I get variances on setbacks that we may not have given here. And then I come to annex that property into Tarpon Springs. Yet my plans would not. The Board of Adjustment would have had, the Tarpon Springs Board of Adjustment would have had to review those. They don't have to. It avoids,
but okay, let me come back at you on.
Okay.
Let's say they develop under R1 zoning in Pinellas County that has 10-foot side yard setbacks, and they annex into the city of Tarpon Springs that has as R100. They're still not going to meet our setback requirements. So my point is, there's always going to be these incidental things, setbacks and things of that nature that are going to be non-conforming. I think either way that we go, and so I mean it's.
So then, why? And forgive me for interrupting, but we're really into something here. Why have a building and land development plan if everything against our border is never going to meet that? My words aren't super clear here, so let me say this again. Why would we even have an internal plan if we're always going to accept non-conforming properties in annexation? Why? And then we've written it into our own rules that we must take them in. That doesn't make a lick of sense. I'm only going to talk to ourselves and us in a circle. It doesn't make any sense. Why even have an internal plan? So everybody inside the circle must conform, but if you're on the perimeter of that circle...
You don't have to conform.
You don't have to conform.
You just get, then
and
you
in
get
fact,
to come in.
We have to take you no matter what your side setback, this, that, height is. That doesn't make any logical sense And that's just one example. Yes, ma'am.
No, you can finish, I just.
And that's just one example, because we just happen to have a residential where we're like, what? What? And if I may be so bold, I think the topic of mandatory connections or mandatory annexations is good, but I frankly don't think that is as critical as annexations that are being gamed, what I'll call gamed annexations. And I'll use a development that had no business being part of the city of Tarpon Springs. It's just my personal opinion, that was out in the hinterlands of Tarpon that someday we might regret ever participating in, and that was gamed annexation of one lot due to adjacency. And here's why I think that that is a flawed thought process in regards to how our annexations generally are written. It more or less says, if you touch us, you get in. That's it. And I know there's some other rules that must be this. That is not how I've understood it, and I read every single annexation we want. If you touch us, you're in. And in this case, we had this big parcel that sat way out here, was not served by the city of Tarpon Springs in any certain way. But that developer bought a square that was maybe 1/100th of that overall development, and it touched Tarpon Springs, and magically the wand went down, and now they get to completely redevelop under our PUD rules and got the golden egg out of that. Now that might be a complete misinterpretation of what went down. That's how I understood it. That's how I saw it. And that is my big concern with annexations, is that our rules are so vague, lax, that anything on the perimeter can come in, and this will tie us right back to what you were referring to, non-conformingness. They're gonna play the system, and I'm even gonna disagree momentarily because I apply for building applications with the county. You know, on step 7 of that application, before your permit is issued, because you have to go through public utilities at that point, you know well in advance exactly what it is, and at that point you decide, how am I gonna do this? Am I gonna go through county because I get a little bit favorable, and then I push in, or do I stop now and come back to the city? So I just happen to see that in a slightly different light. In fact, you gave me a nice variance on a sign once that you don't remember, and you did a very fine job in a big meeting room. Okay, so that was a whole bunch of words on annexation. And I think we need a bigger restructure.
And I like the way, Mr. President, I like the way you put that, because that's the issue. That's the issue.
So, and I understand exactly what you're talking about. The one thing regarding the land use and the zoning, unless they're actually applying to change the land use, we all have similar land use map categories, residential, 5 units an acre, whatever. So they come in consistent with the Pinellas County designation. The zoning, same way. It has to be equal or less intensive in order to, unless you're processing a rezoning to change it, and that's a little bit different animal. So they have to, in order to annex, they have to be able to, they have to agree that they're coming in at an equal or less intense zoning district, as well as land use map amendment. For the ones that are getting changed, that's a different animal to me, and those should be processed, in a little more step-driven process, I believe. So I don't know if any of that made any sense. So
it's a complicated topic, and forgive me, Merle or Mike, is that there's no way to stop the sprawl. But bigger is not always better, and we're told that we must say yes.
So
in 15 years, our borders are just going to be.
So let me also just put a little bit more of a box around this. Now we no longer have our annexation planning boundaries. The interlocal we had with Pinellas County expired back in 2010, and it has not been renewed. But that planning area boundary includes that property. We had an annexation area that basically it presupposes that these properties will eventually be part of the city of Tarpon Springs, and our comprehensive plan addresses that from the overall build out and things and utilities. So we have to look at that larger area. So I just want to make sure that people are aware that that does happen.
I wasn't aware of that. Were you guys aware that there's this super map out there?
Yeah.
I wasn't.
Based upon that, I have a question, comment, whatever. because in other jurisdictions where I worked, in a situation like that, the area within the city's planning boundary was all required to come through the city for approval. Is there not a way to facilitate that? It didn't require them to annex even necessarily, but if they were gonna
I
build
see what
in
you're
the
saying.
city's planning area,
Right.
they had to come to the city
In
and meet
addition
the
to whatever
city's
they do with
requirements.
Pinellas County.
Yeah.
We do not have that in our repertoire of tools right now. So I think that's, looking at the broader annexation area.
Write that down, though.
Word repertoire, that was nicely
No,
played.
no, but the way
I understood
Merle
what he
has
said.
is if it's in your broader area map that you that would be a requirement. That's
So, and some of that would be, I would have to say that would probably have to also be some sort of an agreement with Pinellas County.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to preface that's a little bit outside my boundaries right now, because the whole process to do an interlocal agreement for annexation under the state statutes is a real formal process. So we'll put that we'll make sure that that's in the comments and everything. For what I'm trying to get for tonight, don't know that I can tackle that with this set of amendments, but I hear what you're saying.
And that, go ahead.
I was going to say I don't know what the vetting process is at the county. I think as far as this board that we sit on, I think we do a pretty decent job trying to vet the applications. I don't know if it's vetted as stringent as we try to vet these applications at the city level than they do at the county level, because I don't know who sits on the county zoning board, but I think we try to vet these things pretty good, because we're more
Sure.
isolated for what our community, not necessarily from a countywide perspective. So if they don't vet them as
One of the things that I'll commit to as we're going through the overall update of the comp plan is looking at the area because right now it's very broad as to what the annexation area was, and frankly that's self-serving for tax-based purposes. But there may be a broader discussion to be had regarding, we don't have any utilities out here, we don't have any, maybe that shouldn't be part of our area that we should be thinking about annexing. And so that's something that we can look at through the overall comp plan update. I think that's a worthy discussion to have. The mindset of most municipalities, from a sustainability standpoint, is get every tax base you can. And so that, whether or not that's really a good idea, I think that's something that should be at least evaluated more in depth maybe than it has been in quite some time. So
I have a question, and I'm not trying to cut comments off at all at this point, but I'm just asking, what action do you need us to take tonight to allow you to move forward with what you're doing?
really, I'm gathering input, and at this point, just as a discussion, I want to hear your thoughts, and I've heard a lot of them. Whether or not all of that will get baked into something, to an interim amendment, I have to go have the same conversation with the Board of Commissioners. Obviously, ultimately, my final direction is really probably going to come, as a combination of these two boards. So once I do all of that, so tonight I really want to hear your thoughts. And if it's something that strays outside of what I was looking for direction on, I want that anyway. My biggest concern for the annexation stuff tonight was really the mandatory annexation issue. And how we, the one you were discussing, Mr. Vesey, was really, that was a voluntary annexation, a little different animal. The thing that we're having a lot of heartburn with are these mandatory annexations for utilities, and the way that the process was set up when this was put in place, and that there is no bright line. I don't have anything that says you must come into the city first, or you must complete a project in Pinellas County and then annex in, whether it's non-conforming or this is stuff that I do not have in the ordinance. And so it's I can't tell an applicant right now that he can't go get his permits in Pinellas County and halfway through the process apply for annexation. I simply don't have that ability.
Well, then, I would suggest the guidance is that if the applicant has an inkling that they're going to need to annex because of utilities, that they need to assume that they're going to meet each and every one of our land development and building codes.
I don't
I know
know,
the building is that.
I don't know how you can enforce that.
She was just looking for guidance. I'm not looking,
And I may or may not be able to
Before
do
you
it,
go down
so,
that road,
yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
so sure that that the
Understand.
city of Tarpon Springs can enforce that and say, if you're gonna apply for permits in Pinellas County.
Then don't
and
apply
you
for
have-
permits for Pinellas
You
County.
can't tell someone they can't apply. That's
Then they
that's
should
the
annex
issue.
first.
But
And I don't think you can require them to do that.
If you know you've got 7 steps, as somebody said, and you know it's that part of your steps is you gotta get utilities, and you know where you gotta get them from, you know.
But they have the option. They may have the option.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if the county serves them.
But that's what I'm saying is you're dictating what somebody who has bought a parcel of land on county property
Right.
is subject to county restrictions, county land development codes, county regulations, the county building permit process. When they get to item number 7 on the county's building permit process, now you're saying, oh, well, now Tarpon Springs code applies, and if you decide at that point, what if they decide that at that point, oh, I'm just gonna hook up to county stuff. Later on, they decide, oh, no, I need to be on Tarpon Springs water, which is kind of what you're describing is happening.
But we have the surcharge. There is an out. We just had this at the
So-
last meeting. They don't have to become part of the city. They just pay a
But
surcharge.
you
they
have,
do.
but you have a, but this, you have a.
They do.
This section 20-23 says that they do.
Which is-
That's the hitch of all of this, is how this section 20-23 is written. It says, if you are going to be served by city utilities and you are contiguous to our boundary, you will annex. That's the way this is written. And so I'm looking for a better process in terms of how I deal with this. Do we say you either start your process in the city completely from day one, or you finish your process in an incorporated county and then you apply for annexation? Because I don't have that ability right now.
Now, do we have the authority to raise that connection fee?
That's set by, it's a percentage, and I believe that the state, I think, dictates, we're at the maximum, I believe, as to what that surcharge can be.
So if we say to them, based on what you just said, that they have to go through the complete process at the county and then they can come in, or they come in mid-project and then we take it over, right?
That's the way it is now.
Right, that's the way it is now. Does that cost, do we expend city resources handling that we don't get reimbursed for? Does that cost us money?
I don't, not really, no. So what typically will happen is, or how it has happened in the past, let's say they've applied for their building permits in Pinellas County, they're under construction, and then they apply for annexation. So the annexation process, so there's a fee, they have to pay the advertising, there is staff time associated with processing and annexation. On the building permit side, the Florida Building Code is the Florida Building Code, and there's nothing unique, between Pinellas County and Tarpon. So we can literally accept their approved building permits, and we've done this.
But we have to go and do the inspections, right?
And then they have to pay for inspections
So they
too.
pay
So
for it, doesn't cost
they
us.
pay some of, do we get 100%? I don't know, I'd have to ask the building official, but any impact fees that we assess that the county does not, they have to pay. They have to pay for, like a building permit, I don't want to say it's an acceptance. There's a fee there associated with the building permit and for inspections and things like that.
Can we
That would be
can we
normal.
raise those costs to make it a little onerous for them to do that?
I'm sure that there's a way to probably do that. So you could, that's a fee issue that we set our fees locally. So yes, I think that could be done.
Make it more expensive for them to do that.
So that might be a possibility. Fees
This
is a
seems like such a
disincentive.
terribly inefficient way to administer land use, is that we know today Exactly. Each and every parcel that's being served by the city of Tarpon Springs Water and Sewer, those that are in the city and those that are county. We know right now what that list is. I struggle with the idea that we do this per item, kind of ad hoc as it goes along. And that would go with that boundary of what is anticipated to be annexed.
Well, it's,
Help me understand why
I
we
see
do
what you're
this
saying, but
individually.
But there's also there may be a water line or a sewer line that is in the area that's within a certain foot threshold that would trigger it. It may not just be it's a property being served right now. It's a property that can be served in the future. So it's not I'm trying to think how we could do what you're.
If I'm taking that too far, you can all just look at me and say,
No.
hey, that's too far.
These are the issues where we're facing a lot of, and it's got to be addressed.
You could let that go. It
Okay.
just strikes me as
We'll
odd that
let
we,
it
that we have to go through this
perk.
for
I think
each
she
and
gets
every.
the general,
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
she gets the general gist of what we are concerned about,
Yeah.
so.
The one thing I would like to take a few minutes to talk about, if we can, is just the whole coastal high hazard area.
Number 2.
Yeah, number 2. And the thing that I want, everything that's in here about, with one minor exception, everything that's in here for coastal high hazard area really is predicated upon the evaluation kicks in if you're doing a land use map amendment. Otherwise, it's more of, it doesn't apply, or you have this category or this policy that basically states that for a property that's in the coastal hazard area shall be limited to 5 units to the acre unless a shelter deficit, unless there's adequate shelter or capacity or evacuation ability. So that is, everything else is built around land use map amendments. So if you want to come in and you want to increase the residential density on a given piece of property through a land use map amendment and it's in the coastal hazard area, the answer is going to be no. So that doesn't happen. I think the bigger question of dealing with properties that, and I think this is the real debate point, because we even went as far as, asking Pinellas County, and having them review things for coastal hazard area. Is there shelter capacity? And so when you start, I think that's the one thing that is kind of open to debate about, or could be stronger language or just absolute cleaner language, that if it's in the coastal hazard area, you have 5 units to the acre, unless there's something so overwhelmingly compelling, that to justify, an additional level of density. So I just wanted to kind of, this is another difficult area because we have properties that have development rights on them that are more than that are in the coastal hazard area. This is the other thing to keep in mind. It keeps moving. Every 2 or 3 years they update the coastal hazard area map and it gets bigger. And so, you have properties that come into the coastal hazard area that weren't in it 10 years ago, and now they're suddenly, oh, well, okay, 5 or 10 years ago I had 10 units to the acre, but we don't have a shelter in Tarpon Springs, so I can only develop at 5 units to the acre. So there's some things there from a land use rights perspective that make me a little nervous, and so I just want you to be cognizant of that as part of the discussion, so I'll stop.
Who writes the CHHA?
Coastal High Hazard Area is really the Regional Planning Council, does the mapping. Do I have that right, Pat?
Well, it's ultimately USGS that does the technical.
So it's a slosh model that gets updated and
Slosh model.
sea land over something.
It's a Category 1
Yeah.
surge. That's what the map
Is this a FEMA
represents.
map?
It's not. FEMA has a separate coastal high hazard area definition. So this is in Florida statute that defines anything that is, any property that would be inundated in a Category 1 hurricane essentially is the coastal high hazard area.
I mean, it would be underwater? Is that-
Correct. So that's the coastal hazard area definition. And so we have policies that basically speak to increasing density in a coastal high hazard area by a land use map amendment. So you have to look at, so you're asking for something to go up, you know, those are very cut and dry. And generally speaking, you're not going to get an amendment to increase density in the a land use map, through a land use map change, increase density in the coastal high hazard area. I think where the discussion point really gets to is you've got existing residential density on a property. Let's say it's RM15, residential multifamily, 15 units to the acre. And let's say 10 years ago, it wasn't in the coastal hazard area. But because the maps get updated, and it obviously with sea level rise and the way that the maps work, now it's in. So are they still entitled to their 10 units to the acre?
No.
Okay, you know, or.
Rules change for all of us under our feet all the time, and that's
So
part of
that's, you know, that's the rub with this. And, you know, and I'm, you know, I'm looking for input as to, do you?
So that's the input, is that.
Is no.
This would be this input. Property rights are not tablets of stone that were given from time beginning that you get forever. This is just this person's opinion. They're subject to the community that we're within and the needs and the overall health and youth of the community. Not youth, but use. So it would be my opinion that no, those property rights are not absolute and forever. They're subject to the changes that go on around us.
Within reason.
Well, they did it when,
Yes, no.
when we had to build.
I don't disagree.
within
All
reason
land
is
use
fine.
regulations, 100%, you are not guaranteed the regulations that are on the books today. But with recent changes in the legal spectrum of things, we just need to be careful how we change it.
I'm not suggesting any changes. I'm just suggesting that we live in a community, and if we get the fruit of living within an organized community, we've got to give something up a little bit. A little bit. Hey, back to that CHHA.
Yes.
And something that you keep, that it really only comes up when there's a attempt to increase the density.
Most of our policy language is written around an increase in land use map density through a land use map amendment. There's one specific one that talks about limiting projects to 5 units to the acre if there's a shelter deficit or you cannot be evacuated. So that policy is in there, and that kind of gets to what we're talking about.
Boy, and that's tough to detail that.
It is.
So one of these sub B, page 9B, if I can read it, the proposed amendment would utilize existing infrastructure. What is the proposed amendment? Is this our?
So that would be, so this language here is straight out of the comprehensive plan. So what this is saying is, and so if you go back up and look at the policy 3.3.1, the language.
Yes.
In order to restrict permanent population density increases within the coastal hazard area, the city shall deny future land use map amendment proposals which would result in an increase, blah, 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 except that the city may consider amendment based upon a balancing of these following criteria. So these are the things that you would have to take into consideration if you were even going to entertain an increase in residential density.
If there was an increase in density,
Right.
proposed amendment would utilize
Yes.
existing infrastructure without necessitating the expenditure of public funds. Okay, because I was going through that, those next two sentences going, Okay, so, B here. So, for example, without passing judgment, but they're the most recent and perhaps the most important, and they would make good thought experiments. We had the Anclote Harbors project, which is clearly being developed in a coastal high hazard area, and most recently a proposed hotel, which also is in a coastal high hazard area. If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong.
So So yes, they both are in the coastal hazard area.
Opposite ends of the city of Tarpon Springs, they happen to be coastal, they're both in this area, they're both.
One's hotel density, one's residential density.
Right. Do I understand it right that neither of those projects triggered a density increase?
Correct.
Okay, and therefore they did not get put under the microscope of having to.
The only thing they did, to the extent that other 5 acre limitation, or 5 unit per acre limitation that I talked about, there's a policy in here.
Yes.
So we required them to do a hurricane shelter impact study, which was then also reviewed by Pinellas County.
Okay.
To support, as part of the whole project and the compatibility review and everything else, that was part of that process.
Okay. So within one of those applications, I remember clearly, I might even have brought it to the table, is that I read either a state statute, I think it was a state statute, or it was an opinion by the Attorney General that pointed out, and it was concurred by the Pinellas County floodplains manager, I think her name is Julie, and they quoted and said that there should be a discouragement. And I think that word is clear, that there is a discouragement of development within the coastal high hazard area. Now, I'm only going off memory, I don't see that here, but why would we have a coastal high hazard area designation if there really wasn't any teeth within that, other than not increasing density? That's a pretty low bar in this person's opinion.
And I'll take that opinion. That's why I'm here talking about this particular issue, because it is important. There is wiggle room the way that things are written now, and is there a way to tighten that or make it, we do discourage development in the coastal high hazard area. Unfortunately, we have a lot of development rights that pre-exist all of this. So it's that discussion of, well, the development rights, the residential density is there. So, and it gets back to the question that I just asked you. So should they, if it's in the coastal hazard area, is there another level of scrutiny? And there is, but how adamant are we going to be? Are we just going to say that it's 5 units to the acre maximum, period, regardless of our shelter, of what we can say? Because some of it is, there was a process you go through. You can do a shelter study. We have the methodology to do that. Pinellas County reviews them. And so if something still comes, you go through all that and it says, okay, there's not a shelter deficit until you get to, a Cat 5 hurricane. Well, is that a reasonable standard to apply? Because that standard applies to all of Pinellas County. There's nowhere in Pinellas County that you don't have a shelter deficit at a Category 5. So that's kind of, there's also, what's the right level of cutoff? Is it a Category 3? Is it a 4? Or is it just this? We don't really care. We have so much of our property or our city is in the coastal high hazard area that you're going to be limited to 5 units to the acre unless, we have a local shelter here in Tarpon Springs that's high and dry. That's the kind of direction that I think we don't have in the code now.
It seems to me that basing the density in coastal high hazard areas purely on shelter capacity doesn't make any sense at all.
And that's the way, I would venture that's probably what every comp plan in Pinellas County and every municipality is probably written that way.
But there's so many other more compelling reasons.
Yes, there are. For example, roads that access, or I guess we'd call it an evacuation route, and we'd use another project, is that there couldn't be a more difficult place for a person to have to leave an area. Any input? She's looking for guidance on this CHHA.
Is there?
Well,
I'd be interested to know if anybody else has criteria other than based purely on shelters that drives density in coastal high hazard areas.
I might defer back to the comment I made before, Renee, is that there were state statute, county floodplain manager input, and they used the word discourage. There we might be able to flesh out some guidance from those bodies, because there was a reason that that particular letter was written, suggesting that, and again, I'm just gonna use someone else's words that were written, this is a county official, that said the Anclote project was flat out a bad decision, that it ran in the face of Florida state statute, the CHHA, and those current guidelines. Now, that was bypassed, but that's what that letter was written in, so perhaps reflecting back on that, that we might glean something of value or determine, no, that's not something that needs to be followed.
Point taken.
Great.
Is there anything else that we need to do to address this? Any sort of resolution that would be helpful to you or anything?
No, I mean, the discussion is good. That was really what I was looking for. We've talked about mandatory annexations. We talked about application review processes. Mobile food trucks. I don't know how much you guys want to get into the fray on mobile food trucks, but that was
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. You know, one of the things that, and I recognize that it's required by statute to be able to have mandatory food trucks. I think we did a really good job when we put in criteria with regard to food trucks, because, you know, the idea was, as far as I was concerned, I didn't want food trucks inundated in the Sponge Dock area, because there's a lot of people who spend a lot of money for stick and brick restaurants. It's just fundamentally unfair that they pay taxes, you know, where you could just drive a food truck up and take away their business. So, but I think that was done pretty well. One of the things that I was concerned about, and it goes to, I think it goes to where somebody already having an operating business, I know some of them are already grandfathered in, because I know there's one on the west end of the Sponge Docks, but where a mobile food dispensing vehicle may only be operated by the primary business owner as an extension of the primary business. And my concern with that is, let's say somebody has a brewery, and then all of a sudden they bring in a permanent, if you want to call it a permanent food truck. They're basically buying a portable kitchen, is what they're doing. And so I don't think that adheres to the requirements, and maybe I'm wrong, that restaurants are required to have with regard to grease traps, et cetera. So I don't know how, and the fact that they could put on the food truck all the advertising, because we have sign ordinances. If you're going to open up a business, you're allowed a sign that's whatever size that the ordinance allows you to do. Now you get a food truck that has that's wrapped, you know, and is that counted towards signage?
I don't have an answer for you right now.
I don't either,
Yeah.
but I think that should be part of the criteria. Is you know, you go through all the process to get the biggest sign you can get, and all of a sudden now you get a food truck and you wrap it. Now you've doubled or tripled your signage, and I think that's a way of circumventing part of the sign ordinance. Number one. Number two, when some of these places are granted their permit, they're required to have so many parking spaces. And
Right.
so that when you park a food truck, if it takes 2 or 3 or 4 parking spaces, now you've in fact affected that as well.
So under
Because some of them end up being permanent.
Yeah, under 5606, which talks about mobile food dispensing vehicles as accessory to a food or drink. So all of that would have to get reviewed through our technical review committee. So, you know, they can't blow out their parking. They have to be able to connect to permanent power rather than running generators. If they probably would have to have a grease trap, all those things, you know, connect to utilities and things. So all of that is presupposed in that section of the code. Regarding the signage, that's something I think we could probably provide some clarification to, definitely. The one thing I do want to say, when I pulled this out of Muni Code, it still hasn't been updated because there has been one amendment to this under, on page 22, number 9. The second sentence of that has been struck. The mobile food dispensing vehicle must display a graphic image, name, or branding of the primary food or drink establishment. That has actually been removed from the code. I should have just struck it out of here, but it just hasn't caught up to Muni Code yet, and I missed it. So that's no longer applicable.
So this ordinance has actually done, I think, a pretty good job, because we don't see the inundation of food trucks in Tarpon. So I think it's done a good job as it stands. I don't know, does anybody have any?
So yeah, what we're trying to get to is the idea of, we had some requests for, look, I don't even have a process to ask to like have a food truck at, for a birthday party somewhere else in the city, and that's the piece that we're trying to get to.
I actually wrote some notes about
Okay.
that. And what I did is, maybe anybody could apply for a special permit twice a year.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to put a box around it. You can apply, you can, that type of thing.
So the Florida statute said that we had to afford food trucks a certain amount of latitude, right? Like,
so it limits, so specific permitting to food trucks that's reserved to the state. And the ordinance also said that we cannot simply zone them out. You have to allow them to operate somewhere, kind of like adult uses. You can't zone them completely out of the city.
with that said, doesn't First Friday,
Special events are,
wouldn't that have, if only on First Friday alone, we have a whole downtown full of food trucks, would that meet that standard?
I don't know. I truly don't know the answer to that. If we allow them through the special event process, does that meet only and didn't allow them anywhere else, or any other latitude? Does that meet the litmus test of the state statute? I don't know.
So then if we, my wife held a surprise birthday party for me, and she had a food truck brought in, and it was in Oakley Village, so just letting you know. It's way past the statute of limitations.
Well, and it's exactly that type of thing that we're trying to provide some sort of a process that we don't have now.
But then that would also have to meet whatever their homeowners association rules and all that stuff.
Yeah.
If they are not allowed in there, they're not allowed in there.
So there's ways to regulate them without making it too onerous.
But I think it's like Mike says. I think whatever we have appears to be working well. We're not inundated with them, and a lot of this had to do with the fact that a person could put a food truck in their parking lot of their restaurant was during COVID, because we wanted people to be able to eat outside instead of having to come inside of a restaurant and all that. So, but it doesn't seem like we have a food truck problem.
And for me, I was approached by several restaurateurs down at the Sponge Docks who were concerned about, somebody who owns a big parking lot down there and having a bunch of food trucks serving food, taking away from the restaurants or the restaurant experience down there. Yeah. And I thought that, I think we did a pretty good job of crafting the requirements, but special permitting or special event permits,
we need a private property equivalent for a special event, so that, if a legitimate way to come through and say, hey, we're having a graduation party and we want to have a food truck between these hours, for, that's, we don't have a mechanism right now for that, and that's what this was really kind of focused around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next.
I appreciate all the conversation.
All right, wonderful.
Anything else you want to throw into the mix here with,
I think we threw enough at you.
Well, I think going into the next one, we'll probably hit a few more things.
there will be, and think about things that, you know, and thinking more land development code and the smart code with the sponge docks and the downtown and everything. You know, we've kind of got a bullet list of things that we think need to be addressed, that aren't like policy earth-shaking things, or just, you know, things that come up in the review processes and things like that. So
I like this approach. That we're piecemealing it and having discussion, a good discussion on the items instead of inundated with a bunch of information.
So yeah, I like this process. I think, you know, I think the department's been, you know, I don't want to say accused of, but, you know, I think sometimes the perception is that we draft a strike through, underline, and bring it through, and, you know, and that has been done in the past, and so, you know, without, you know, enough maybe discussion before we even get to that point. So I really wanted to be cognizant of that and talk to the board and to the Board of Commissioners with these things, get some broad input, then we'll go back, listen to what we heard, craft what we think might be a good response and a strike through, underline, and then we'll do this all again. So that's kind of the process I want to take.
I appreciate you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can
Not
we
too
move
painful.
to item 8 on our agenda in that case?
Do we have to do a motion on this?
I don't need a motion,
It's
no.
not necessary. Okay.
That brings us to the consideration of our workshop action items. I'd like to commend the staff for doing, I think, a really good job of compiling a lot of comments of different sorts into some sort of order that kind of makes sense, at least it did to me. And I think it did a pretty good job of covering everything I could think of we talked about anyways. But what is our desired outcome tonight on this before we start talking about it?
I think that we have, there's some of these that you just talked about. I think there's a couple I'd like to see if we can come to some action on. And then I've kind of got them organized into 3 groups. Things that are under your powers and duties, things that are in your rules of procedures, and things that are not under your powers and duties. And I do have some updates on where these are. So we could go through them one by one. I don't think it'll take too long.
Okay.
So I believe items 1 and 2 we've just dealt with Renee's items that she was looking at. Item 3 is where you all had generally expressed a desire for application deficiencies to be addressed and brought back to you. And the idea is that once you render a decision, the applicant does not then bring in more documents, information, and revisions, things like that, on your way to going to the Board of Commissioners. Now, I will say we have implemented that practice already. So we have started doing that. If you were to want to try to request that the board consider some type of code amendment, you would look at Article 12, which is the administration and enforcement of the Land Development Code. That's the part that tells all the application procedures. And you might request that the board, perhaps, for applications that go to the Planning and Zoning Board, those applications that the board would deem appropriate, that they might require the applicant, that the applicant may not amend the application or submit additional materials once your final decision is rendered. Or there may be other ways to do that. But if you wanted to go that route, I would be looking for some type of a motion that expresses that general concern, that applications that come before you, once you make a decision, that they can't basically be revised, I'll say, and without coming back to you in some form.
Okay, so just for discussion purpose, so if somebody had an application and decided they wanted to amend the application, that they could do and then come back in front of this board again without having to go through the whole application process all over. Would they have to, they just do an amendment and then come back in front of this board? Because obviously, if the issue was, we got so much, and then when they went in front of the commission, they got a lot more material. And I thought that was,
Right.
not really respecting what we do
Yeah.
as far as review of the application.
And right now, they technically can't. Once you render a decision, there's no mechanism for amendment, but that might be the code change that you recommend. So we have had a couple recent ones where they withdrew and then reapplied to come back and have it come before you again with that revision of their project.
Would we make that motion at this moment on this item?
It would just be a motion to address
To recommend.
that concern
Chair,
with whatever
You would make a
specifics.
motion that would be a motion to recommend to the Board of Commissioners to consider making X change to X ordinance because reason.
Yeah, I don't,
And it could be,
Ordinance, Article 12? I heard you
Yeah,
reference.
You could also do it more generally.
so the process would be, you would ask the board to consider that. The board would then direct staff, correct me if I'm wrong, Renee, to draft come up with a draft change. That would obviously come back to you if the board directs us to do that.
So either through motion or consensus, however you want to do that, if these are things that I can go ahead and wrap into this other set of amendments that we've been talking about, I'm going to be going to the Board of Commissioners. I can certainly carry that forward at that point in time. I think you're talking about the ability to amend an application rather than having to withdraw. Those are fairly minor things that I think we can bring forward to the board with this other set of amendments.
I'm happy to make a motion. I didn't mean to.
yeah, I was going to say, I don't have a problem with an applicant coming in front and seeing that it's not going as well as they would expect it to do, and thinking that they'd have to go back to the drawing board and amend their application and come back to us. I think that's not problematic. What I found problematic is, us making a decision and then going to the next, going to the Board of Commissioners with a whole new set of information.
I think
That's
that
the
was the
problem.
heart or the crux of what this was really about. It just might
Okay.
not have come out in words, is that we weren't getting complete applications.
Yes.
We were getting incomplete applications. So if we're more or less in a consensus on that thought process, I would still make a motion in regards to number 3, board identified application deficiencies to be addressed. We'd request that staff ask the Board of Commissioners to address this issue where it was clarified to the applicant that they had to submit a complete package and that any changes would have to return to the P&Z board prior to going on to the BOC. Did that catch everything?
Yes, I think so.
Go ahead.
And that's a motion.
I'll second that one.
Okay, now we can discuss it?
Yeah.
That would be up to the chair, but I think that that's the process.
Yeah, we have any board discussion.
Yeah, so I think we'd have to identify materiality on this issue, right? Because look at like the hotel, right? They brought their package to us, then they made some site plan changes to the facade. Remember, they updated that facade, and it was a different facade than what we saw here. Now, that didn't trouble me because I don't think that was a material change in the application. So we wouldn't want to just say that any adjustment would have to necessarily come back to us. I think there has to be some materiality, right?
Yes.
And I guess that would have to be, somebody's going to have to make a judgment whether that warranted coming here.
So, yeah, and with the hotel project, that's a good example. you actually had a condition of approval related to the appearance, and
That
so for them,
required it to change, yeah.
all right, now it's dead. Sorry.
That's what she said.
So I think things like that, you're clearly giving the applicant direction to change something in its process as it moves forward. And I think that's what we need to be cognizant of. I think absent that, you know, if you had just said, if you were recommended approval of that without that condition about the appearance, then I think they're stuck. So I think we need to be cognizant of when we bring things to you.
Right.
Do we want the latitude to introduce something? And I think we need to actually talk about that with these applications, or do we not, on a case-by-case kind of
Somebody
basis?
has to make that call. So
yeah,
that would be
yes.
staff, right? You would make that call.
Well, the other
whether that
question
was-
that kind of begs then too is what we had talked about to some extent about allowing them to amend an application. And if we're here meeting with them and it becomes clear that they're not gonna get where they wanna be at the end of that meeting, and they wanna choose to amend their application, but if they, in a situation like that and they amend it, it comes back to us before it goes to the BOC, right?
And this is,
I think the problem is that right now, and I think this is what we're looking for clarification on, under our code, you either have to approve it or deny it. You don't have the ability to defer it, and I understand why that is, but I think there needs to be some allowance for, I don't know. I think that's the piece that's.
So should the motion be amended to include deferment upon request?
well, I got a question for council. Okay, and they're right. I mean, when we look at an application, it's either we pass it or we don't. And you've made the comments several times, it's not our job to assist the applicant in their process. But I think maybe I'm wrong, you know, I think it's our job, because, you know, when everybody's going through this process, is not to help the applicant, but give the applicant guidance as to what this board maybe would look at favorably. I think the discussion we had is, can I do that or can I not do that? And that gives the applicant the opportunity to go back and amend their application to resubmit, so we can look more favorably upon something, because otherwise, it's either a yes or no. Well, I'm sorry, it's a no, but it would have been a yes if you'd done a few things. So if you go back and do these few things, it might be a yes.
The answer is going to be, it depends. If it's a legislative decision, then I think I don't have a problem, legally speaking, with you providing guidance to them with what you would like to see.
Okay.
If it's a quasi-judicial proceeding, I have a problem with that, because remember, it's their burden. Some of these people are more sophisticated than others, and that's what staff is there to help them through it. But whatever they present to you is either sufficient to meet the criteria, or it's not sufficient to meet the criteria.
But let's say it's denied without prejudice. Give them opportunity to come and.
You don't have the ability to do that in your code.
Okay.
You have the ability to recommend denial, or you have the ability to recommend approval. Now, what we were talking about is, you want to give them another shot to amend it. And you had mentioned earlier, when it's looking like maybe it's not going to be favorable to them, they can walk away. I mean, that's their right to do that. I think and then you please correct me if I'm wrong, I think what this was saying is that after you make a recommendation for denial or a recommendation for approval, whatever your recommendation is, if they take those notes or whatever was discussed, and then they amend it or they add more beef to it to bring it to the Board of Commissioners because they've heard this board speak, you want that to come back to you so that you can consider it further with the additional information.
Because it's better for them to go to the commission meeting with a recommendation for approval from this board
approval, right.
than to go in front of the commission, so we've amended it based on recommendation
Of a denial. Right.
And
I'm going to, forgive me. That is the intent of the motion that I put on the table. That was the intent, no more, no less than that. Thank you for clarifying that.
Right, so I think I had 2 points there. One, clarified the motion. 2, if it's quasi-judicial, that's it, that's all they get.
all right, So,
We did that, we did that during that, remember that one on Grove Street? When those guys came and they had that zero setback?
Oh, the first one, they had to take it back
Yeah.
and bring it back as a totally new submittal.
Right,
though.
but then they were putting a second one in, and we said, you know, and they got the hint, like, hey,
Yeah.
this is gonna go the same way, and then he said, okay, we're gonna amend it. We're gonna pull it back and then come back later. And
Yeah,
and that process worked out well.
Yeah, that's an example. That was the same applicant, two properties. You rendered a decision on one. They had to reapply with a different plan. The other one, you're right, during the meeting, he kind of saw the handwriting on the wall, and he chose to defer the application. Now, the applicant can do that. You can't defer, but so that is another thing that happens.
Yeah,
You're
but
right.
in conversation, again, I don't know how well these people are coached in advance as, you know, to how the process works. But in conversation, they can kind of see where it's going, and then they could have, like you say, they could have the choice to say, okay, I'm gonna pull the application and come back and change it.
So if we have an application, it comes through this board and you recommend denial, and certain things come out at that point in time, and this is really more a question, I think, for the attorney. So the applicant decides after that they want to amend the application. And that's what we've been told we don't have the ability to do. They have to either withdraw the current one and reapply with something new, but they can't amend. And the reason that gets, I mean, frankly, it's a paperwork drill on our part, but, you know, plus they have to submit a new application fee and everything, as opposed to being able to submit an amendment to an application in process. Now, they're still going to trigger them to come back here, but that's a logistics thing with us that is problematic.
So I think that's where the board is trying to recommend an amendment to the code to provide for that amendment to the application to trigger it to come back here. Now, that might trigger advertising costs, that might trigger
Advertising
other
is,
things,
yeah,
right.
but
There's no provision in the code right now that allows for that amendment. It is either,
Right.
like you said, it's either a withdrawal or they move
Right.
forward.
So we would like the ability to have an amendment process to an application. And I
that's
think
what the board is
as long as it
recommending.
comes back to you guys.
And
Right,
we
it would have to
would
come
too.
back to
I
the
didn't
board.
have that. Chair, I'd like to amend my motion to include the amendment process.
Motion was,
It was?
yeah.
I
But
don't
I like
remember
the
saying
amended
that.
motion to include the amendment process. That's great.
and
Okay.
I'll re-second it.
Okay.
And can
More
we have a roll
specificity
call?
is always good.
Mr. Koulianos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis.
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes.
The next one, number 4, is regarding review of application types. This was specific to the potential for this board making a final decision on applications. During the workshop, we came up with 2 types that could potentially be a final decision. Their resolution, they are adopted by resolution. That would be conditional uses and site plans. If you recommend to the board that you would like to see those, have a final decision by the Planning and Zoning Board, that would be accompanied, at least at the staff level, by a request for them to review Section 12 of the city charter and consider any amendments to that they deem necessary. That's not really under your purview to recommend, but that's kind of part of that. So the question for you is would you like to ask for that type of review authority, or for them to consider and bring back some type of amendment for that?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it makes sense. They've got a lot to deal with, and it at least saves them some extra effort on those particular applications, and allows us to have some items at least where our decision is final and things don't get changed. So, I mean, I think everybody agree with that?
Yep.
So in that case, I guess on this one, we just need to make a motion to request that the commission be asked to revise that?
Yes.
Discuss it, yeah. But you're also missing a board member.
Yeah, well, for a vote, but could we open it up, make a
we
motion
have
in
a
a second,
quorum,
and then wait for them to come back to
I
the...
mean, you have enough, it's, you guys are just making a recommendation, so
Yeah.
you're okay to.
Yeah, I think we can do the motion and say he's back anyways.
I'll go ahead and make that motion.
I second it.
We'll let him get back for the vote here.
Catch you up.
All the way, I heard all the discussion.
Okay, good,
Okay.
perfect.
So, is there any further board discussion before we have a roll call?
Nope.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Koulianos?
Yes.
Mr. Vesey?
Yes.
Mr. Kouskoudis?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
And then number 5 is just some of the sections of code you all were suggesting changes to or addressing. We talked about some of those earlier, and a couple of these may come back to you as well. Renee was talking about doing some kind of quick fix amendments to the code that we're going to be bringing back, and then the rest of these would go through the comp plan process or come back later. But some you talked about tonight, but we'd like the chance to just bring these back where they're appropriate. We will obviously save this list, keep adding to the list with the concerns that you all bring up.
Okay, so as far as tonight goes, there's no action that you're
We
looking for
aren't
on?
requesting any action
Yes,
tonight on
okay.
that. Number 6, there was a lot of discussion around a mission statement or a kind of a statement of your purpose. We wrote something up. I don't know if you want to look at it. There might be 2 ways to go with this. You might just ask staff to put that in your scripted agenda and have it read. You might want to revise it. You might want to adopt it into the rules of procedure, in which case I'd bring it back next month for adoption, revision under your rules of procedure, however you want it worded. So that's what that one is.
I would suggest there's a lot of verbiage there.
Yeah, might be too much.
Why don't we take the time between now and our next meeting to review it and each get our own thoughts together on it and then
Okay.
discuss that at that time? Is that agreeable?
I agree.
That's fine. I'll put it on the agenda. And then number 7, we already identified that that's covered in your current rules of procedure. That's where you can, have one of you represent the board, the Planning and Zoning Board before the Board of Commissioners on an application. Number 8, you've already talked about, that's annexations. Again, the charter revision, potential charter revision or review, that was already discussed, so we'll include that reminder with the review of application types. Staff recommendation on applications. We will be diligent in making the applicant aware of potential outcomes of the public hearing process. We're not always making recommendations now. I think that's something that it's kind of fluid, that we will work out at the staff level and with the board.
I appreciate some of those changes,
Okay.
because on the more controversial ones, you have been approaching it differently, and it's appreciated.
Okay, great. And then number 11, the Sustainability Board input. That is something, sustainability standards are definitely something we expect to be incorporated into the comp plan with land development code changes following. They are still diligently working on their action plan. And I think they're still looking at maybe fall for adoption. So
One thing that we have done is, in this regard, our sustainability coordinator, Robin, is, we've pulled her into our technical review committee meetings. So she's reviewing and at least seeing these site plans as they're coming through, and, where we can make, suggestions and recommendations. We can't, if it's not in our code, we can't require them, but we can at least make them aware of opportunities to, make things, whether it's solar or, having, pre-conduit for electric car charging and things that we can encourage them to do. We're doing that now.
That seems like a really good place to start.
Okay, so number 12, we have initiated orientation for new board members. I sent you that package. And then number 13 was just, I think we just talked about that. Maybe it's kind of the flip side of suggesting improvements. You're kind of, I think, getting more to where you're telling the applicant or giving them the message, these are areas we think are not, we don't think they carry out the land development code, and then the light bulb goes on with them. Well, maybe if I change these setbacks, they'll like it better. So I think that's kind of a flip. You're kind of doing that.
Yeah.
So those were the items we had from your workshop.
Okay, yeah, I think that does a pretty good job of addressing it. Anybody else have any comments about any of it?
We've come a long ways.
Yes.
Mostly you have done a lot of work. We appreciate it.
Yes, I'd definitely like to thank staff for all the effort in both of these things tonight, and I think we've made some real headway towards changing some things that are going to improve the way things work. So thanks for the time and effort. If nobody has anything else.
A question.
Yes.
So this is May 9th. What's the meeting this Wednesday?
That's a comp plan meeting, right?
Yes, this Wednesday we'll be having our second kind of workshop and exercises on a comprehensive plan. Our consultant will be here.
Okay, so that's
through
just an
that.
open, forgive me, I had confused this list with that meeting that was this Wednesday. This is actually for a meeting, action item from the meeting on May 9th. Yeah, it's okay, got it.
So Wednesday's meeting, is that just for this board, or is it gonna be?
Yep, just for this
There may
board.
be only 3 of us. John, you're not gonna be here Wednesday, right?
You have a conflict.
And I know Nick's out of the country.
If you have anything you'd like me to bring to that meeting, let me know.
And we did send
thinking cap.
exercises ahead of time. I just gave
Yeah, I'm gonna go
Member Koulianos a copy of that, so he's got homework.
homework to do.
If anyone wants those ahead, I don't know, I guess we can give them to you tonight if
Yeah,
you'd
if
like
you
to
don't
take
mind,
them.
give me
I'd like one.
Yeah.
Yeah, the caveat here is don't talk amongst yourselves until you're in a public meeting.
Right, in
So-
other words, don't ask if there's anything you want me to bring to the meeting. That was a
No,
mistake. I
yeah,
didn't
so,
mean
no, just in all seriousness, if you work on these yourself, that's fine. Don't have discussion offline with your board members about it. It's to get your individual input. As a board, then you can discuss it on Wednesday with the consultant and with us, so.
Yeah, because for example, my schedule's really, really tight the next 2
Understand.
days. So anything I can get in advance, that I have a few minutes to look at when I'm driving, I'd appreciate it.
And we've allowed, we're allowing all of the boards to do the work, and if you can't attend the meeting, you just turn it in to us when you're at some point. It doesn't have to be, just don't discuss it, just give it to us and treat it like an ex parte kind of thing. So just, that way you don't have to be here, but we can get the input.
And there are some kind of minimal instructions on those first 2 pages, that if you miss the meeting and you can call us individually, or if you want to watch that first part of the meeting later, where we describe exactly what you're supposed to do, you could do that too.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, thanks to everyone for their participation. I think it was an excellent meeting, and we stand adjourned.
Very efficient.